Have you ever caught yourself looking for signs in random coincidences? Maybe you thought of a friend and they suddenly called you. Or you noticed repeating numbers on a clock, 11:11, 22:22, and wondered if the universe was trying to send you a message. Or perhaps you've connected a series of small events and felt convinced that they weren't random, but part of a bigger pattern. It's a strangely human experience, the feeling that life is full of hidden messages waiting to be decoded. But what if I told you that your brain is designed to do exactly this, whether or not a real pattern exists? In this video, we're going to explore why your mind constantly searches for meaning, even where there may be none, and what this reveals about your deepest psychological needs. You'll also learn how to use this tendency consciously, so that instead of falling into traps of illusion, you can channel your search for meaning into clarity and growth. At the heart of this lies something called apophenia. It's the tendency to perceive meaningful connections between unrelated things. If you've ever seen a face in the clouds or thought a random sequence of events was fate, you've experienced it. From an evolutionary perspective, this makes perfect sense. Imagine our distant ancestors walking in the grasslands. If you hear rustling in the bushes, you can interpret it two ways. Either it's just the wind or it's a predator. If you assume it's just the wind and you're wrong, you're dead. But if you assume it's a predator, even if it's only the wind, you stay alive. This survival bias hardwired our brains to detect patterns, even false ones, because the cost of missing a real threat was so much higher than the cost of overreacting. Fast forward to today, and we're still running on this ancient operating system. But instead of lions in the grass, we see signs from the universe in traffic lights, coincidences, or chance encounters. Philosophers have long noticed the same tendency. From Kierkegaard to Nietzsche to Viktor Frankl, thinkers have debated the human hunger for meaning. We don't just want to survive, we want to make sense of our survival. We want to know why things happen, what role we play in the bigger picture, and whether our lives have significance. The problem is, this hunger doesn't turn off, even when reality is chaotic or random. So the brain invents stories. It connects dots that may not belong together. It gives random chance a narrative frame. That's why gamblers swear by lucky streaks, why conspiracy theories feel so convincing, and why people sometimes interpret random misfortunes as karma. But here's the paradox. The same mechanism that misleads us is also what allows us to create art, science, and philosophy. The ability to find connections where none are obvious is the foundation of creativity. It's what helped humans discover fire, agriculture, medicine, and technology. Imagine looking at stars in the sky. They're just random points of light, but our ancestors connected them into constellations, then stories, then navigation maps. What began as apophenia became astronomy. The question is not whether you see patterns. The real question is, how do you distinguish between patterns that help you grow and illusions that trap you? Think about it in your own life. How often have you tried to find hidden meaning in why someone didn't text back, or why an opportunity slipped away? Sometimes your brain is simply overlaying a story where none exists. But other times, the meanings you create become self-fulfilling. If you interpret a setback as a signal that you're a failure, you may withdraw, which then reinforces the story. If you see it as a challenge to grow, you change your behavior and move forward. The meaning itself wasn't objectively real, but the effect it had on your life absolutely was. This is the double-edged sword of apophenia. It can paralyze you with false connections or empower you by shaping constructive ones. Psychologists call this the difference between adaptive and maladaptive meaning-making. Adaptive meaning-making is when you create a story that helps you process life, grow, or take action. For example, telling yourself, "This challenge is teaching me resilience." Maladaptive meaning-making is when the story keeps you stuck or distorts reality, like believing, "Bad things always happen to me because I'm cursed." Both are generated by the same brain function. The trick is to notice when you're drifting into illusions that harm you versus narratives that support you. One simple exercise is to pause whenever you catch yourself saying, "This must mean something." Ask, "Is the meaning I'm creating helping me act with clarity, or is it making me feel trapped and powerless?" For example, if you see repeating numbers on a license plate and decide it means you're destined to succeed, that belief may motivate you to push harder. But if you believe the same numbers mean you're cursed, you might spiral into anxiety. The external event is identical. The difference lies in the story your brain tells. Another tool is to remember the concept of probability. Our minds are terrible at intuitively grasping randomness. We expect random events to look evenly distributed, when in fact randomness often clumps together. If you flip a coin 100 times, you may get streaks of 5 heads in a row. That doesn't mean the coin is enchanted. Likewise, if you encounter 3 disappointments in a row, your brain may scream, "There's a curse," when in reality, it's just probability playing out. Keeping this in mind can prevent you from over-assigning meaning where chance is enough of an explanation. But I also want to be clear, this doesn't mean you should dismiss the human search for meaning as silly. On the contrary, it's one of the most beautiful things about us. The fact that you want life to have a story is part of what gives life richness. Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, famously argued that people can endure almost any how if they have a why. Your brain's hunger for patterns and meanings is not a bug, it's a feature. The challenge is to feed it wisely, so that the meanings you construct support your well-being rather than distort it. So how do you do that in practice? One method is something I call meaning calibration. Instead of asking, "Is this meaning objectively true?" ask, "Is this meaning useful?" For example, maybe you interpret a coincidence as a sign that you should reconnect with an old friend. Whether or not the universe intended it is irrelevant. If the interpretation leads you to deepen a relationship, it's useful. But if the same coincidence makes you obsess over fate or feel trapped by destiny, it's not useful. Shifting from truth to usefulness allows you to harness your brain's meaning-making ability without getting lost in illusions. You can also cultivate a tolerance for uncertainty. Much of our tendency to overinterpret comes from discomfort with not knowing. We crave certainty, even if it's false. But practicing phrases like, "I don't know yet," or "This might just be random," can free you from forcing every event into a rigid story. Philosophically, this is similar to the Buddhist teaching of beginner's mind, approaching life with openness rather than preloaded assumptions. The irony is that by allowing yourself not to know, you often gain clearer insights than by forcing artificial clarity. In your daily life, this might mean resisting the urge to label every missed opportunity as a sign of failure, or every stroke of luck as destiny. Instead, you can see them as part of the unpredictable fabric of life, and then choose what story to tell in a way that empowers you. When you do this, you transform apophenia from a trap into a tool. You stop being a passive decoder of signs and become an active author of meaning. And that shift can give you a sense of clarity that is both more realistic and more liberating. Now, before we move on, let's reflect on why this is so challenging. Your brain is not trying to trick you maliciously. It's doing what it evolved to do, protect you by finding order. But living in the modern world requires a new kind of skill, learning to separate when that instinct helps from when it hinders. In the second half of this video, we'll dive deeper into specific strategies you can use to train your mind, so you can spot illusions without losing your sense of wonder and embrace meaning without being enslaved by it. So how can you start to apply this awareness in your daily life? One of the most practical steps is to create a small mental checklist whenever you catch yourself searching for hidden meaning. First, ask, is there a simpler explanation rooted in chance or probability? Second, ask, does the meaning I'm assigning empower me or disempower me? And third, am I using this meaning as a reason to avoid action or as fuel to move forward? By running through these questions, you begin to interrupt your brain's automatic story building and replace it with conscious choice. This doesn't mean you'll stop seeing patterns. You won't. But it does mean you can decide what to do with them. Let's ground this with an everyday example. Imagine you're waiting to hear back from a job interview. Days pass with no reply and your brain starts spinning stories. They must have hated me. It's a sign I'll never get a better job. Maybe I should stop trying. This is apophenia at work, connecting one silence to a sweeping story about your future. But if you pause and ask yourself the checklist, you may notice: 1. There are many simple explanations for the delay. 2. The story you're telling yourself makes you feel powerless. And 3. It's causing you to avoid action rather than pursue it. From here, you can shift the meaning. Instead of "this silence means I failed," you could choose "this silence is neutral. I'll use the waiting time to improve my skills." The external situation hasn't changed, but your relationship with it has, and that's what determines whether you spiral or grow. Another helpful tool is what I call the zoom out technique. When you notice yourself obsessing over a sign or coincidence, imagine looking at your life from the perspective of 100 years into the future. Will this pattern still feel significant, or will it blend into the randomness of countless other events? Often, this mental distance shows you how arbitrary most patterns are. But sometimes zooming out actually reinforces that a meaning you've chosen is genuinely aligned with your values. For example, You might realize that interpreting a challenge as a call to be more courageous will hold meaning no matter how much time passes. The zoom-out technique prevents you from drowning in illusions while still allowing you to hold on to the stories that truly matter. There's also a deeper philosophical practice you can adopt, becoming comfortable with partial meaning rather than total clarity. Many of us want life to provide a single definitive explanation for why things happen. But the reality is that meaning often comes in layers. Something can be partly random, partly shaped by your choices, and partly interpreted through your perspective. A breakup might be chance in some ways, your behavior in others, and your interpretation in still others. Accepting layered meaning frees you from the trap of needing life to be perfectly ordered. It allows you to hold complexity without forcing everything into a neat, illusory box. At this point, it's also important to talk about the emotional dimension. We don't seek meaning just to make sense of the world logically. We do it to soothe ourselves emotionally. Chaos feels threatening. Randomness makes us feel small and out of control. Creating stories gives us a sense of order, even if it's artificial. So when you notice yourself clinging to a narrative, remember that it's not weakness. It's your brain trying to protect you from the discomfort of uncertainty. That recognition alone can help you soften your self-judgment and approach the process with compassion. But compassion doesn't mean surrendering to illusions. It means guiding your brain toward meanings that serve you. One way to do this is to practice reframing randomness as opportunity. For example, if you miss a train, you could see it as a sign that your day is ruined. Or you could frame it as a chance to slow down or to encounter something unexpected. Both are stories, but one drains you while the other gives you energy. By training yourself to default to constructive interpretations, you not only reduce unnecessary suffering, you also transform apophenia from a liability into a strength. There's also a practical exercise you can try right now. Think of one area in your life where you feel stuck, maybe relationships, career, or personal growth. Write down the story you've been telling yourself about why things are the way they are. Then ask, is this story based on facts, or is it my brain connecting random dots? If it's a story built on apophenia, rewrite it into one that is both kinder and more useful. For instance, if you've been telling yourself, I always end up alone because I'm cursed, try reframing it as, I've had relationships that didn't work out, and I can learn from them to make different choices next time. This shift isn't just semantic. It directly changes how your brain predicts the future, which in turn changes how you act in the present. Neuroscientists sometimes say that the brain is less like a camera and more like a storyteller. It doesn't simply record reality, it interprets it, compresses it, and weaves it into narratives. Knowing this gives you an extraordinary power, the ability to question the narrator and even rewrite the story mid-sentence. You don't have to accept every connection your mind invents as truth. You can treat them as drafts, and then decide which ones make it into the final version of your life story. Now, let's tie this back to philosophy. One of the greatest questions humanity has wrestled with is whether life has inherent meaning or whether we create it ourselves. Existentialist thinkers like Jean-Paul Sartre argued that meaning isn't given to us, we give it. Apophenia is the raw material of this process, the brain generating endless possible connections. Your role is to choose deliberately which of those connections you want to solidify into your personal philosophy. In this sense, being human means living in the tension between chaos and order, randomness and story. And the price of clarity, as the title of this video suggests, is accepting that sometimes the clarity you create is yours alone, not the universe's decree. So what's the practical takeaway? Don't fight your brain's desire for meaning, but don't become its servant either. Use it like a tool. When faced with chaos, ask yourself, is the meaning I'm seeing real, or is it a helpful story I'm choosing to create? If it's neither real nor helpful, let it go. If it's helpful, keep it, even if you know it might not be objectively true. Over time, this practice builds a healthier relationship with your mind's pattern-seeking engine. You start to live not as someone at the mercy of signs and coincidences, but as someone who understands their origin and chooses consciously how to respond. And this brings us to the closing thought. The fact that your brain looks for meaning in randomness is not a flaw. It's evidence of your humanity. It shows that you are wired to care, to search, to want life to matter. The key is not to extinguish this impulse, but to guide it. To stop mistaking every coincidence for destiny, and instead use your capacity for meaning-making as a way to create a life that feels alive and intentional. If this idea resonated with you, I invite you to carry it forward. Like this video to remind yourself of its message, Share it with someone who might be caught in the web of false patterns, and subscribe to Mind Unlocked for more tools to help you think clearly, live consciously, and grow with purpose. After all, this channel is your toolkit for better thinking. And sometimes the greatest clarity comes not from the meanings we discover, but from the ones we choose to create.